I've been thinking a lot about this Richard Hawley song recently, Open Up Your Door, which starts like this.
Open up your door, I can't see your face no more. Love is so hard to find, and even harder to define.
Let's put aside our cynicism for a moment and resist reading the song too literally. Otherwise it just sounds like a somewhat pathetic and doomed to fail booty call, a kind of generically plaintive, erotic entreaty.
Oh, open up your door, 'cause we've time to give, and I'm feeling it so much more. Open up the door, open up your door.
Before popular music gave us love songs like this one, poetry had already spent thousands of years churning out open up the door content. The theme of pleading for entry, whether literal, metaphorical, or both, has been a mainstay in love poetry across cultures and historical periods. Consider this passage from the Bible. I slept, but my heart was awake. Listen, my beloved is knocking. Open to me, my sister, my darling, my dove, my flawless one. Song of Songs. Here the lover literally stands outside, knocking and pleading for entry, both physically and emotionally. An ancient poetic embodiment of the same sentiment that Richard Hawley is crooning about in this song. During the medieval period, the trope was central to the aubade genre. My last video is about this. Those plaintive dawn songs and serenades in which a lover would sing outside a beloved's window or door, hoping for admittance before the sun rose. Shakespeare plays with this theme in Romeo and Juliet, where Romeo is figuratively and literally locked out of Juliet's abode, needing access to her through clandestine means, albeit via a balcony instead of a door. With the advent of recorded music, the motif seamlessly transitions into blues, rock, and soul, often symbolizing longing, reconciliation, as well as physical intimacy. Take Darryl Banks' 1966 song, Open the Door to Your Heart, explicitly framing the door as a metaphor for emotional openness. So let's just say that this phrase, long before Hawley adopts it, is already a well-worn euphemism for emotional and physical intimacy, turning up in countless songs across a number of genres, most recently in the chart-topping Bruno Mars Anderson .Paak track from a few years back, Leave the Door Open.
I'ma leave the door open. I'ma leave the door open. I'ma leave the door open, girl. I'ma leave the door open.
Sexuality, particularly heterosexual male desire, is always structured around a door. The woman's body, her attention, her emotional availability. Also a doorkeeper, whether that be the woman herself, her social conditioning, or the unspoken rules of attraction and selection. The game of eros, if we want to call it that, is about gaining entry, being chosen, proving oneself worthy, aligning with the criteria the doorkeeper has set, consciously or unconsciously. And thus, an entire industry of seduction manuals and PUA, pickup artist strategies, have been built around hacking this door, leveraging persuasion psychology, status signaling, and social engineering to bypass resistance, whether framed as chastity, caution, or evolutionary selectivity. A woman can't sleep with every man who desires her, whereas most men probably could and would. For women, By and large, it is only those who meet her threshold of desirability, dominance, charm, wit, wealth, beauty, or some ineffable alchemy of all of these distilled into that elusive force we call attraction, who she will open the door for. But that's not where I want to focus here. Rather, I'd like to imagine that Hawley, like me, desires not just this, but rather the unmediated access to another's inner world, a kind of access that is unguarded, uncurated, and unself-conscious. Which, let's face it, aside from certain moments of human connection, often ones where alcohol or some other substance has loosened the other person's natural defenses. Oh, and also therapy, right? Human beings are fundamentally closed doors to us. Yes, they might show us the odd fragment, the odd glimpse, that little filtered version of themselves, but the deeper, the undistilled essence of another person usually remains behind the door of the self, inaccessible, obscured by layers of instinct, fear, and social performance. Is it any wonder then that we often feel existentially lonely, even in the company of others? When I speak to couples who come to see me for marriage counseling, oh, the irony, yes, but anyway, people who have lived, side by side for years, sometimes for decades, it always strikes me how much unspoken content lies between them. Content that I get to hear about when we have, the individual sessions that intersperse their couple slots, in which I'll often say, but have you told your partner this? Have you voiced this to them? And the answer is usually some sort of version of, well, I have, but they didn't hear me, or, I tried, but it never landed. One of the reasons I decided to pursue the work I do is because I wanted to get behind or beyond another human being's door, which is, of course, as ever, the door to the ego cage, our very own fortress of self-protection, self-image, and carefully maintained narratives. This door, which few, if anyone, truly pass through, is built from layers of our defenses, learned scripts, and the roles we adopt to stay safe, loved, accepted. Even we may not fully enter this door, which shields us from feeling too much, from being too vulnerable, from exposing the raw and unguarded parts of who we are, even to those who are closest to us. The door is also a threshold of risk and energy. Communicating with another requires effort and interruption of the ongoing dialogue that we're constantly having with ourselves. And even though, much of this now happens through the more time-efficient, asynchronous and disembodied social technologies that dominate our phones, opening the door still demands stepping outside the comfort of our internal monologue, offering something that might not be reciprocated or worse, misread or ignored entirely. And who has time for that anymore? The reason I love the song as much as I do is that after a second pleading verse, this one suggesting an even greater escalation of absence, perhaps the lover is dead or with another, for they have not just disappeared from view, but from the very field of presence itself. We now enter a more visceral, embodied plea for love, I guess, if love here is that which refuses abstraction, that which must be felt rather than theorized, that which exists only in the immediacy of presence, in conversational or physical intimacy, in the suspension of self, the risk of exposure, that moment when love ceases to be a question and becomes a sort of event, something that happens to us rather than something that we secure. We get to experience all of this at the end of the song in a section which is predominantly wordless until the main refrain returns to greet us. Let me play this for you. what is happening here, I ask myself. Maybe the denying other has indeed finally opened the door in some way, responding to his entreaty, granting him her longed-for presence. But I'd like to think that something larger, more, fundamental is going on. That this moment of arrival is not just about reconciliation or possession or even a kind of relational closure or closeness, but perhaps something more transcendental. I'm guided in this thinking by the French philosopher and theologian Jean-Luc Marion, whose book, The Erotic Phenomenon, I've been reading recently. Well, dipping into it, it's not an easy read. Marion argues that love does not belong to the lover as an object to be attained, nor is it a negotiation between two parties. In its purest form, Marion would say, love is given, and it's the givenness of love, perhaps predicated on the love given us as vulnerable infants, a love that wasn't at least completely contingent on reciprocity alone. Love happens, a happening. We do not control it, we do not even really fully understand it. And perhaps what happens at the end of the song is not that the lover has finally answered the call, but rather that the call itself has been transformed into something untethered from a need for a response. The structure of longing has shifted, we might say. The desire, initially directed outwards, looking for confirmation, becomes instead something that is more self-generated, self-sustained. Love ceases to be a demand and becomes instead a phenomenon that saturates being. This is a crucial idea in Jean-Luc Marion's book. For Marion, saturation refers to an excess, a phenomenon so overwhelming that it surpasses our capacity to fully grasp or contain it. Many altered states have this aspect to them. A saturated phenomenon is one that arrives, we might say, on its own terms, flooding experience rather than fitting neatly into our expectations. Which sounds a lot like music, at least those moments when music enchants and seduces us. If you want love, Richard, Steve, he would say, look to anything in your field of experience that exceeds you, that you cannot predict, that breaks beyond your attempts to name or hold on to it. Perhaps in poetry, in music, in touch, in silence, in surrender, in anything that allows time to slow and presence to deepen. The end of the song, then, is not just an emotional resolution, but rather the dissolution, we could say, of love as something sought or yearned for, replaced by the emergence of love as something given, independent of reciprocity. At the end of the song, we're no longer listening to a plea for love, but instead we find ourselves inside the phenomenon of love itself. And once we've experienced this, we may realize that this feeling can be had from almost any phenomenon in the world that arrives in excess, that overwhelms our ability to contain it, and that gives of itself freely without demand or transaction. And what might that sound like or feel like, you ask? Well, for me, it sounds and it feels something like this.
Open up your door.